evening.
Hello, Laura.
So, you are perhaps the most well-known son of CAMRA, not like those two that we've just had who disappeared by 1977, but don't tell anyone. You joined the staff in 1976, having already had a hugely successful career as a journalist on the Evening Standard, and you worked as the editor of the Socialist Worker, amongst other posts. You went on to edit 24 editions of the Good Beer Guide, including a number that made the bestseller list, which is incredible for a beer, a drink, a food publication. It just doesn't happen. Absolutely amazing achievement. You edited What's Brewing for more than a decade in total, over I think 4 different stints we established in the end, and you've written numerous celebrated books. You also helped to found the British Guild of Beer Writers, and you are justifiably celebrated as, you are one of the most celebrated beer writers in this country. Blimey. I am talking to beer royalty, ladies and gentlemen. I'm always a little bit nervous when I talk to Roger because he is just so well respected in the field. This is me getting all beer geeky girl on you now. So when we spoke, you had a huge number of fascinating stories about your time with CAMRA, but I know that in particular you remember 1989, the beer orders, as an absolutely monumental time in your career. Can you tell us a little bit about when, there it is.
There it is, there it is.
You had to make me read the whole thing, didn't you? I remember. But luckily we got locked down. So can you tell us about what happened when the MMC released their report, the Monopoly Mergers Commission released their report in 1989, and how they have been influenced by the campaign? There's a lot of really important things that have happened in beer over the years, and it's really important, I think, to say how CAMRA actually influenced them, and the beer orders really is a massive turning point.
Well, it's a very long time ago now, but we have to remember that I wouldn't say the enemy, but the people that we were campaigning against in the early years were the big 6 national brewers, which was Allied Breweries, Bass, Watney's, Whitbread, Courage, and Scottish and Newcastle. And the MMC report, which people said was a CAMRA document, it wasn't. I mean, CAMRA gave evidence to the commission, but a lot of other people did as well. But what the commission said underscored everything CAMRA had been saying for nearly 20 years, was that the big 6 acted as a cartel. They fixed beer prices and they wickedly overcharged for what is laughingly called lager in this country. And they made very sweeping recommendations for change. The main one being that no brewery could own more than 2,000 pubs, and that the rest of the pubs owned by the big 6 had to be turned into really free houses. And this was followed in a few years later by the beer orders brought in by the government. And the government said that they had to turn their pubs into free houses. And suddenly you go into a Whitbread pub and you'd find Weatherhead bitter, and you go into a Bass pub and you'll find Jowls bitter. And you thought, wow, this is amazing. Then you realise these were all beers that had been coming from breweries actually closed down by the big 6. The whole thing was a complete con. So that very quickly stopped. And one by one, the big 6 brewers, with the exception of S&N, who went on brewing and were taken over by Heineken, all the other big breweries eventually left brewing, and they were replaced by the pub companies that we know today. Now, the interesting thing about the MMC report was there was a minority report by a man called Leaf Mills, who said that if you don't let the big brewers tie pubs, you'll end up with non-brewing pub companies who will be just as bad as the big brewers. Now, I think CAMRA, and me in particular, because I remember we rushed out a special edition of What's Brewing to hail the MMC report. We were naive, and Leaf Mills was absolutely right that the pubcos really were no better than the big 6 brewers, because they too have restricted consumer choice. When I say the pub companies, I'm talking about the big pub companies, Punch and Enterprise and M&B, but some of the smaller pub companies are absolutely excellent, offer very, very good range of beers. But we end up today, whatever the problems of the big 6 and the MMC report in the pubcos, beer choice today is so much better than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, the first Good Beer Guide had 116 breweries. The current book, Good Beer Guide, has more than 2,000 breweries, and the choice is really quite remarkable.
And we have amazing resources like What Pub as well that is fed into by members. So just tens of thousands of entries giving consumers great access to information. And CAMRA has really been all about giving the consumer access to information. And in that respect has really, in my opinion, helped start beer writing. I mean, we had great people like Michael Jackson out there and doing their thing already. But then people like yourself, Tim Webb, have really brought beer writing into a professional realm, haven't you? And started the guild, for example.
I remember having a drink with Michael Jackson in the 80s in a pub near King's Cross. Pub is no longer there, sadly. It was on the Grand Union Canal. And the pub was supplied by beers from Everard's in, guess where? Leicester.
I think they might be on the other side of my...
And Michael said, let me get a beer. Bit nutty this. And I said, bit nutty that. And we both thought, that's not really saying very much about beer, a bit nutty that. And we both went away and we started to work out a language of beer because nobody else had done it before. I mean, wine writers, of course, have a language of wine, don't they? But nobody had a language of beer. And there was nobody to help us because the brewers didn't talk about what their beers tasted like. We had to work it out ourselves. I remember going around the London Drinker Beer Festival with a notebook, buying little tiny samples of all the beers that John and Christine had on offer. And I was sniffing, sampling and making notes and trying to work out why particular beers tasted the way they did. I then did 5 editions of a book called The Real Ale Almanac, which gave tasting notes for all the cask beers available in the country. I remember going to a meeting in Edinburgh. I don't know if Colin was there, of CAMRA members. And one of them said, you produce this book, The Real Ale Almanac, and you say this beer has chocolate notes. Are you taking the piss? How can beer have chocolate notes? Nobody would question that today, would they? Because you know, if a beer has chocolate malt, it's likely to have chocolate notes. But that was where we were all those years ago. There was no language of beer. And I think Michael Jackson, myself in a smaller way, and many other beer writers now, Tim and so on, have developed this language of beer to challenge the supremacy of wine.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Roger. Again, all my guests tonight, I just want to sit and chat to you all forever, but
I'll just tell you what I'm drinking.
Please do.
I had a bottle of beer hand delivered today by the Chiltern Brewery. It's their 40th anniversary Ruby Ale. It was brewed to commemorate the 40th edition of the Good Beer Guide. And they said, you'll enjoy this tonight. How apposite, what brilliant timing. Lovely beer, and it's bottle conditioned.
Oh, how fantastic. Cheers, Roger. I'll drink for that. Thank you so much. And thank you for your incredible contribution to CAMRA over the years.